I'm excited too. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah. Uh, I think it might be the last to die, to be honest. If you asked me about cold email, LinkedIn, even like any like social outreach stuff, I'd be more apt to say is dead than cold calling is. It is still really effective, and it's been my most reliable channel for every team. I've built over 80 sales teams for all of them. It's the most reliable channel, and it makes sense when you think about it. The best thing that you can possibly do is have a conversation with a potential customer. So if you're in person at a conference, or you go to meeting somebody in person over lunch, like that is the best connection that you can build. The next best is having a conversation with them back and forth, because it allows you to position yourself, or excuse me, your product, your service, whatever it is, position yourself as a solution to the problems that they're actually having, how they articulate those problems. The other channels don't let you do that in quite the same way, which is why I think it's going to be very long before it's fully replaced. So, long way to say no, I do not think it's dead. Yeah, it's a big distraction, I think, a lot of times, like especially with the technology, new technology keeps coming out now. Like we're in this world, so we see like every little new flashy sales tech that you can purchase, and they all brag about the same thing. We're going to increase ROI. I mean, there's so many sales tools out there because it's so tied to revenue. And the challenge is, what I have found is the more tools that you add to a sales organization, the less efficient they become, because you're playing around with tools now, and it adds complexity to a workflow. And the fundamentals, like doing the fundamentals really well, is absolutely critical and the prerequisite to buying any tools or anything like that. So anyway, you and I are probably on the same page there, but that's how I think about it. I want to do the fundamentals really, really well, cold calling being one of those fundamentals, and then we can get cute with testing different stuff later. Well, I want the other person I'm talking to tell me their current situation, because then I can better position myself as a solution to that problem, right? Everybody's solutions are all very different. And there are some things that we call, and maybe more in direct to consumer, where we're calling with a really specific offering. I still want to make sure that the person I'm speaking to has context of the problem that our offering is designed to solve, and their experience today with that problem. So then that way I can make sure I position myself accordingly. So, how I think about a cold call is, I think, what do I say at the beginning that gets them out of that mode of, hey, go away, I don't want to talk to you? The very first challenge to overcome. They just want you to go away. Once I've gotten them from trying to get me off of the phone to being willing to talk back and forth with me, great. Now I'm in good shape because we can have a bit of a conversation. I like framing it as trying to see if I can even help them. Like, maybe do I even have something that you need? Have a bit of a conversation there, and then from the conversation, at a certain point, it starts to shift, and they'll show interest signals. Well, how do you guys help with that? And that's where now we move into taking that interest signal, building curiosity, and then asking for a meeting. In my world, like we do a lot of B2B stuff. So a meeting is like one of our big things. In B2C, it might be directly a sale or whatever the direct next step is, whatever it might be for you. That next step is so critical, but I feel that we need to get them talking first, properly position ourselves, and then once there's some interest there in getting to a better place than they are today, solving a problem that they have today, then we get them to commit to a next step. for a cold call, that it depends if we're talking B2B, B2C. Which one do you want me to cover? Okay, B2C. Um, the objective of the cold call is to get whatever the next step is that you're trying to get. Not trying to sell your end thing. Now, sometimes in B2C, you call trying to sell something. So, for example, I got a cold call from some company trying to sell me Carnival cruises. Like, do you want to go on a cruise? They're just trying to sell me a cruise right there on the cold call. Fine. No other next step there. But then I've also received in the past a direct to consumer cold call where they want to get me on a phone with somebody who's qualified to help me do whatever, right? And maybe they're selling vacation packages or something. Or maybe you're cold calling directly, trying to get somebody to sell their home. Are they going to make the decision on a cold call to sell their home? No, of course not. That's a big decision to sell your home and move and stuff. Or if it's an investment property, like if you want to sell it at all. What you're trying to do is you're trying to understand, is it worth going down this path in those examples? So unless you're selling something very transactional like a cruise, the purpose of that cold call is to build enough curiosity to justify having another conversation where we dive in a little bit deeper. And if you have that lens and you go, okay, this call is just designed to get me to that next step, as opposed to do everything I can to make you interested in what we have to offer, I think you'll find things will move a little bit more smoothly. Right. And it's what we do in person too. Like you go and you build relationships with people. I mean, we've known each other for a good amount of time now. Whenever we see each other in person, like we hang out, we have fun stories that we can talk about. Like we have a good in person relationship. You can't do that at scale, so I get like that is going to be a much higher level thing that we're not going to be able to get everyone to do. But you want to be able to at least start to form that kind of relationship. Hey, we stand on the same common ground, right? And if you can do that on a cold call, you'll find that the calls go better, which means you're more likely to get to that next step, whatever it is for you. But we all have to think like, what is the relationship we're trying to build? And even though it's not as robust as maybe like real strong interpersonal connections, it's still a relationship at the end of the day. And you want to be thoughtful of the other person's perspective and not just bulldoze all over them, which is what I see a lot of folks do, right? Like I get a lot of calls like that. It's just not the right way to start a relationship. It's such an important thing. It's a first impression. Like we should treat it with respect. Yeah, everyone's going to do this a little differently. Um, Sometimes it's warranted to fully script everything, and then the game becomes memorize it and say it as naturally as you can. Um, Generally, the more transactional the sale, it makes a bit more sense to have a really structured approach. The more uniform the folks that you're reaching out to are. So if they all encounter the same problem in a very similar way, then it would make the most sense. Like, so for example, the first, when I was an SDR and I was cold calling, I was cold calling into salons and spas. One of the things that the product I was selling did is it did automated reminders for people when they need to get their hair cut again. Everyone's interaction, every salon owner I spoke to, their interaction with that pain point of having to schedule is the same. So that can justify a bit more of a structured scripting because it's going to be very repeatable. Now, I didn't have all that structured scripting. So I'm not saying it's mandatory. I'm just saying that's when you will typically see it. And some people are very into getting nerdy about their scripts and getting really prescriptive with scripts and making it word for word. I generally don't have an issue with it, especially if it's working. Like, who am I to tell you not to do it that way? But how I generally do this, because I think it's the most flexible and it applies to everyone, is I heavily script the intro. Because the intro, you have the least room for error. So I script the intro to the word, and I'm okay. They adjust a little bit of the wording because it fits more how they speak. That's not a problem to me, but generally I want it to be as structured as possible and follow what I think best practices are. If we change any of the words, then it's like you do it that way every time. You don't just get to wing it. So really structured intro, really scripted. Then I use a framework for the body of the conversation. So we're in a conversation with somebody. We might have some questions to identify what's your current situation, maybe some questions on like what's your goal, like where are you trying to get to, what's the gap between where you are and where you're trying to get, and then how are you trying to solve this problem today. So I'll give like some questions and more of a framework around how to navigate those conversations. And then at the very end, I script that, but you plug a lot of the things that you learned from the conversation. So it's something I call the recap, where you're saying, so what I heard is, all of these things, why don't we do this? Let's set up a time to whatever the next step is. So it's scripted, but a lot of the stuff is pulled from within the conversation. So it requires the person cold calling to be very present. And that, for some people, doesn't work all that well. I'll add another layer to this. When I see really heavy scripting, it's typically because the people that they're hiring aren't capable yet, because they're, everyone's capable of doing this, but at the point of hiring them, they're not really capable to navigate these conversations with folks in a dynamic way, and they need a real rigid structure. So I'll see it if you hire, let's say it's a financial advisory firm, they're calling high net worth individuals. They're hiring people right out of college to do that, or maybe even the people who aren't in college. What they'll do is they'll give them really structured scripts, because they're not going to be able to navigate a conversation with somebody who's a not high net worth individual in a way that person feels like they're talking to somebody who's worth them talking to and booking a next step with. So they'll heavily script everything because this person's not capable of that yet. And for that business model, it makes sense. They churn through people like crazy. Anybody who's been in that space knows this. So that's another place that I'll see the heavily scripting. So hopefully that gives like a good like breadth and depth of how I think about this, where an individual would fall in there. Like, all things being equal, I try to stick to scripted intro, give them guidelines or frameworks for the conversation, and then a edited scripted conclusion. Yeah, the list is the strategy, especially early on. And what I'll find is an organization will be a little lazy about the list that they create. They'll create the list, got to give it to the reps. And then the reps just spend so much time calling people that aren't a good fit, or the numbers are bad or whatever. And if the operations isn't well set up, then they just keep recalling those people over and over and over again. And you're just burning time and wasting a ton of resources. So I take the list very, very seriously. So as far as like list building, and then how you, like, what the process looks like based on the different maybe verticals or the different types of people that you're reaching out to, I'll go quickly through what I feel about both of these. So the first thing is the list building itself. How I generally do this. Now there's two roles here. There's like the business to consumer, and there's the B2B side. So I'm kind of going to jump between the two of them here. But ultimately, what I'm looking for is, where can I get the best possible contact information for people slash of the role that I'm looking for. So if it's B2B, it's more role oriented, company oriented. If it's B2C, it's more person, demographics, that kind of thing. So one, I care about the coverage of all of the people in that demographic. So if it's B2C and I want certain income ranges, who has the data that is the most reliable of those income ranges? If it's B2B, it might be who has the best data on plumbing companies that I can reach out to, right? So you want to figure out coverage. And I generally do this by using sample lists. So if you're doing B2C and you have 200 people that you know are the good fit, your team has called them, we're really confident this looks good. That's a great way to go to a bunch of different vendors and say, hey, here's a sample of 200 leads. Do you guys also have information on these people? You don't give them all the information, you give them the name or whatever you need to, see what their coverage is. And because you already know, because they're your good leads, you can tell the accuracy. And it gives you a sense of percentage, right? And there's a high percentage of poor accuracy when it comes to leads. I think B2C, they actually do this a bit better than B2B. And B2B, it's like maybe 60% accuracy, sometimes 50. It can be really rough because of the turnover at the company, right? So you call someone who used to work there or something. In B2C, they actually do this a bit better. I think normally it's like 80 or 70 is I think what the average is. Gray is like 80, 90. I mean, that is what you're striving for. Same on the B2B side, by the way. If you can get 80% accuracy on your phone numbers, it's incredible. Okay, so that's what we do from like a list building side, is like make sure that we have a good understanding of the quality of the leads that we're giving our team to reach out to. Then when it comes to segmentation, like which of the people do we want to prioritize, I do that based on success in the different ways that we would segment. So if it's B2C, we're talking about demographics. Let's stick to our income example. Maybe there's really a large range of incomes that make sense. We do really well in the middle range. We do a little less well, but still well in the low range, but the high range is like pretty low conversion for us. We might weight different ones and then test different scripting for the higher range. So that's how I would segment it out and then think through each of the different segments and try to adjust messaging accordingly. But you got to be tracking the conversion by segment as well. So that's how I would think through that. And then finally, as we're calling through all of the leads, you're sorting them. Okay, so-and-so wasn't a good fit. Mark, not a good fit. We don't delete the lead. We mark it not a good fit, so that our next upload, if that person's on it again, we already knew it was not a good fit. If you delete it, you're re-adding it, and now we're calling them again. Bad phone number, same sort of thing, right? So as you call through it, then you start marking things appropriately, because you're going to follow up with these people. You want to know, are they the right fit? Did we validate the phone number ourselves? And also, did they answer the phone or not? These types of details are really helpful as you recycle lists in the future. So that's how I think of it, pretty end to end. I come from the lens of what do I already know about this person? And I'll call out what I know early. So one that I run into often, this is more B2B related, but I think it'll still help illustrate the point. What I come into often is, hey, are they using a specific tool right now that we might integrate with? Maybe we sell a software that integrates with their software. That's really nice. I know that going into it, I can reach out and say, hey, I'm giving you a call because you're using ABC software. And now all of a sudden, the context of the conversation becomes much more narrow. And that's the difficult part with the cold call. And B2C, this is very, very obviously a challenge. When you call someone out of the blue, infinite possibilities of what this call could be about. And then you start talking, and sometimes the reveal of what you are going to be offering to them takes a bit of time. And they're still in infinite land of opportunity. But when you know a little bit of detail about them, like, hey, you own a house in this area or whatever it might be, you now just start to like narrow down in their mind what we could possibly be talking about. And that has an advantage and a disadvantage. An advantage is now your questions are going to make a lot more sense to the person. They're going to be more able to answer it quickly because they're not also trying to like translate what the heck is going on here. One of the challenges with that is they might immediately know that this is not a conversation that they want to have. So you need to have a bit of tact there. But being able to address that type of stuff earlier on, or empathy, as you were describing it, and show that you kind of understand that this person's situation that they're calling already, shows that you are intentionally reaching out to them versus you're someone in a call center like this, half alive, just ripping through calls all day. So you want to use it when you can, and I totally agree with you. The smaller you can create those segments, the better. Yeah, that's good. I like that phrase a lot. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So a couple of components to consider here. The first is, what process are they going to be following? So I want to give them the process. What some people do early on is they hire a sales rep and they're like, all right, you better hit this target at this time or this isn't going to work out. And it's like so much like on them. But that exists regardless of you explicitly saying it or not. If they're not hitting their numbers, they're not going to stick around too long. It's our responsibility as leaders to go through what's the process that needs to be followed in order to yield the result that we're looking to get. And you first get the result by doing it, and then you hire the people to follow the process you did to get that result, and that allows you to step away from the process and make tweaks and enhance it and make it better. So if you're building the team for the first time, figure out what the process looks like. Hey, I make 100 calls. I know I'm going to talk to 7 people, 10 people, and I know I'm probably going to close one deal if you're selling on that call, or if the next step is a follow-up call, I'm going to book 2 follow-up calls. Whatever it might be. Once you have a general idea of like, hey, these are the calls I do, these are how I do the calls, this is the outcome I get from the calls, perfect. You're bringing on somebody to execute on that process. I like hiring people right out of college. That's just how I've always done it. I've had a ton of success hiring people with a college athletics background, so I kind of stick to what has worked well for me for a long time. But I've hired people with all sorts of different backgrounds. Like, you can find these folks from anywhere. Generally, if it's a direct closing role, I I value experience, and I want somebody who has experience selling into the market that I sell to. That is really important to me. Industry experience, very, very important. But also selling into that industry is important. Like, it's tough to just take somebody who has a bunch of industry experience and expect them to be able to sell really well. For the most part, there's a couple of exceptions, but for the most part. So I'm looking for somebody who's sold similar offers to the similar market. When it comes to just straight up cold calling, I like people with as little experience as possible. And I want them to follow my process, and I want to measure what they're doing, all of the activities that they're doing, the amount of calls, the people they talk to, the meetings that they booked, whatever the metrics are that you're tracking. I want to look at that, and I want to help them improve the process that I've laid out for them, but also help them improve their calls by listening to them, giving them feedback. And then eventually, like, you'll be at a place where it's like, okay, great. I have a process that I feel pretty confident that I can hire reps, they can follow and hit their number. Now let's hire the best possible reps we can, and then it becomes a people game. How do I hire the best people? Yeah, well, unfortunately, what I'm going to say is you have to figure it out at some point. Like you can't just blindly hire a sales rep and hope that they are great salespeople. I mean, I've encountered some situations where it's like someone in my network, they were a great salesperson. I brought them on and it kind of worked out. If you're willing to, I guess, just churn through salespeople, but I don't care how like nerdy or weird the founder is. They're typically the best salespeople because they just know the problem so well. So I would just encourage like do the selling, figure it out. And if it means you have to make 1,000 cold calls, and that might sound like a lot, but you think like use a dialing tool, you can make a couple hundred in a day. Like, if you can make 1,000 cold calls just to get your initial numbers of how many calls you make, how many people you talk to, how many next steps get booked, then at least like you have something figured out, and then you can hire people. Now it's not required. You can hire two people and give them a list of leads and say, call these. Here's a script I want you to use. It's just going to be really difficult because there's a situation that happens where the rep is expecting to earn a certain amount of money because they have a number that they can hit, and then they're working for a person who has no idea what's required to actually hit that number for them to earn the amount of money that they were hoping to earn. So then it gets a weird dynamic where if it's not working out, it's like banging our heads against the wall, and then they're going to come to you and be like, hey. I'm not making the money that I was hoping I was going to be able to make here, and I don't think it's my problem. I think you just don't know what you're doing. They're going to say it way nicer than that, but that's like what I want to prevent. And you prevent that by having some level of confidence around the process that you're laying out. So you got to figure it out a little bit how you do that. Maybe you have different options, but I like telling the founder to go and make 1,000 calls and let's see how it goes. Yeah, it helps having the experience for sure because some of it, and you know this too from hiring sales reps, like you just get a feel and you kind of can just we can spot our own. And salespeople are really good at selling themselves. Salespeople are super charming, so it's easy to like fall into the charm of the siren salesperson with a slick back hairdo and a good smile, right? So I try to be like more thoughtful. I try to be more thoughtful of that. So here's how I think about evaluating the sales talent. The first thing I want to do is I want to know is what their experience level is doing the job. So I'm going to give you two examples here: one where we don't have experience, and one we do. For the sales where we do, what's their experience level doing the job I'm asking them to do? So that starts with me understanding the type of rep I'm trying to hire. So being very disciplined about somebody who's sold this type of offering into this type of market. Perfect. Do they have a network already? Do they not have a network? How many years experience? Like just being really clear and then don't deviate. Man, this person's great, but they've sold similar product but into like a way different market. I don't know if I would move forward with that person, especially not early on, like I think you need to be pretty disciplined, unless it's such a unique market that is like there's no salespeople really in it. That's very rare. So that's like for selling is I try to be really disciplined about the ideal candidate profile that I'm looking for and make sure I don't deviate just because the person on the other end of the phone is charming. When it comes to people who are brand new, this one's like a little bit more structured. Drive. I want somebody who's driven, who's a curious person. Natural curiosity is very valuable to me. Um, this is kind of tied to natural curiosity, but the willingness and ability to figure things out. And you ask them questions around them demonstrating those behaviors. Coachability is another really important one. This is why the athletes thing is a bit of a cheat code because they kind of have all of that. They need to figure things out. They have to follow a lot of structure with their training. And then game day, they still need to be able to be creative and maybe do something a little differently than they normally would do, and then fall back into the fundamentals when you got to fall back into the fundamentals. So it fits a lot in the sales persona, which is why I like it. But if you can identify those traits in a person, then usually they're going to be good when they start doing the role at your organization because they have the habit of demonstrating those types of traits. Let me give one more actually here. This is probably the simplest way I can frame this. If you're interacting with somebody, follow everything I said before. Like make sure they have the experience and stuff. But if you like even people who have experience selling into that market, there's different levels of skill, right? Um, Ask yourself, would I buy from this person? It's a good heuristic, especially like if you somewhat fit the persona they're going to be selling to. And if you wouldn't buy from them, why would your customers? So like where this is the most common is you're hiring for a role. The sales rep's very aggressive. They have that aggressive persona, and you're thinking like, oh yes, I want this Wolf on Wall Street like crazy salesperson to come in and close a whole bunch of deals. But you personally wouldn't buy from that person. Probably not the right hire for two reasons. One, because maybe their skill set or their personality will rub people the wrong way. They won't want to buy from them. But the second one is because it's clearly not the culture that makes sense for you. So I have to like talk people off of a ledge sometimes where they want to build this Wolf on Wall Street, like crazy aggressive sales team. But then you're talking to the person who's going to be running the team, the founder in some cases, maybe a sales leader. They're not that person. That's a big cultural mismatch. Yeah. Was it more? I'm curious about this. Was it more cultural challenges within the organization, or how he was making the customers feel after they've signed? Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, look, I run into something similar because the my organization, we help people build their sales teams. Right, it's a big part of what we do, like this kind of strategic go-to-market strategy, building your sales team with the right hires. Um, I could get away with a lot of like pretty pushy sales tactics because the people I sell to are looking for somebody who can help them implement these teams that use these kind of tactics maybe. And I've gotten feedback from folks of like, man, you could probably get away with a lot. It's just not how I sell. And I was trained to sell that way. I started off selling gym memberships. We used to tell people like, oh, you need to talk to your wife. Is she gonna be against you wanting to get in shape? Like we would do stuff like that. And I remember my boss. This is like one of my favorite stories. My boss, when I was selling gym memberships, a guy named Tony, one of my favorite people of all time, probably the best manager I ever got to work with. He was such a character. And in fact, a lot of my management style was built off him. He was just like just this total character, and he used to walk backwards in the gym and like run into people on accident. He was hilarious. But I'll never forget. He would get in, he would get in the weeds with us. He would close deals with us, and he was talking to somebody who walked into the gym who said like, okay, we had an enrollment fee. I want to pay the enrollment fee with cash, and I'll use my card for the monthly thing, the subscription. And she goes, let me go to the ATM. So she told him, let me go to the ATM and I'll pull out cash. And he goes, great, I need a walk. and he walked to the ATM with her because he always told us if they walk out, they're never walking back in. So like I was kind of I came up in that environment, but the reality is it's like not quite my personality to sell that way. Like I care really deeply about the people that I'm going to be working with and that my team is going to be working with, and I want to make sure that they have a good experience, sure, but also that I'm not pushing anybody to do something that they're a little uneasy on. And I think it's a little bit lazy to just say like, oh yeah, well Kyle, if you're so confident in the value you can deliver, then you're pushing them. Pushing them is the wrong word, maybe they would say, but you're getting them to make a decision that is net positive in their life. So you should be really driven to get them to make that decision. Yeah, I think that's probably true, but at the same time, I want to make sure that that person, through their own autonomy, comes to the same conclusion without me using little tactics that might exploit psychological mechanisms that we have in order to make that decision. And it's totally justified to say, oh, Kyle, that's a limiting belief that you have. And I'll totally accept that. It's just with accepting that, I like the way and the culture that I've created. Every organization leader has a culture that is aligned with them. And that's really the core point I want to make here. And if you aren't that type of person, you are going to have a very difficult time running a team of people who are. It's going to become very, very difficult because there's such a big mismatch there. So just something to be aware of. Yeah. Yeah. And you can win with both, right? Like it's not like I think people have the might fall into the trap of thinking, oh, but if that's the culture that leads to more sales, then why not just make that your culture? And maybe that leader should have stayed. And then the team around that leader should have changed. I think it's easy to make that argument, but it's a bit of an on paper leap you're making. In practice, I've seen very effective sales organizations that have that kind of culture that's much more aggressive. And I've also seen really successful sales organizations where it's not as aggressive as a culture. And then there's obviously the in between. So, which one is the right one? It's going to be whichever one seems to work really well for you. That's a journey that you're going through to figure that out. Less so of like, let me copy and paste what worked for that organization. Yeah, I've worked in a lot of different industries, and I think about five. I've worked with five companies that are in cybersecurity, selling into the same markets, similar services, um, completely different sales processes. Completely different. You'd think you could copy and paste them, but it doesn't work out that way always. So you just got to be aware of it. Mm. So it's a bit of a sliding scale. So for situations that are very or for product services that are very transactional, and you're not holding on to a deal. It doesn't take 3 months to close a deal. It's getting closed in 7, 14, under 30 days. Then what ends up happening is there's less time needed to manage deals in a pipeline. If you're working a deal for 6 months, you're doing a lot of things with different decision makers and whatnot in order to get that deal done over a 6-month period of time. So the more deals you have, the more of that extra work that has to happen, which means you have less time to do new meetings. So it's a bit of a load balancing equation that you're doing. Here's the general heuristic that I use. Very transactional sales, I typically will have 2 SDRs doing cold outreach or working inbound leads, whatever it is, feeding 1 AE. Sometimes it's not perfect. If it's a larger team side, maybe it's like 1.7 SDRs, but sometimes I see 3 SDRs. It just depends on the sales velocity, how quickly we close deals. You generally will see more SDRs, less AEs. Then once you get more into the mid-market and it's like a 3-month sales cycle, 4-month, 6-month sales cycle, that's where you might start seeing 1-to-1 or start slipping to 1-to-2. And then you get to more of the enterprise, and that's where sometimes you don't have SDRs at all. Or maybe you have 1 supporting 3 or 5 people. It just depends. Along that entire spectrum, there's always a consideration. We'll just not have SDRs. Let's have the AEs just do all of their own prospecting. That typically makes less sense the more transactional the sale is, because if you have your AEs doing the prospecting and closing the deals, what ends up happening is you have this feast or famine issue where it's like, this month, I don't have any meetings on the calendar, so I spend a bunch of time doing cold outreach. Next month, I'm closing all of the deals that I booked, and I'm not spending a lot of time filling my pipeline. And then the month after that, I have no pipeline. I'm trying to fill my pipeline again. And then some months you do well, sometimes months you don't do well. So generally more transactional. I will almost always have SDRs, with exceptions around a number of inbound leads, et cetera. But even then, sometimes it makes sense to have SDRs, or a lot of times it does. But anyway, I'm giving you like a little bunch of different little examples here so people can piece together what makes the most sense for them. But that's generally how I think about it. So for top of the funnel, like cold outreach, I care about calls being made, people who have answered the phone, and I care about meetings booked, because that'll tell me the conversion. I make 100 calls, I talk to 10 people, I book 1 meeting, right? 10% data connect rate, connect to meeting booked rate is 10%. So that gives me a good sense of where our current bottlenecks could be. Sometimes I break that up more, especially if I'm rolling out a new script and I want to get even more granular, where I'll have the team manually track this, by the way. Number of calls they made, people who answered, so same 2 metrics there, so connects. And then how many times you said the intro, how many times you had a conversation, how many times you asked for a meeting, and then booked the meeting. So I'll even break it up a little bit more granular, and I'll have them do it for 2 weeks. It's a little manual, but whatever. It gives me a lot of insight into how the script is working. Okay, so that's like more top of the funnel stuff. Then there's show rate. Now we're kind of moving away because we booked a meeting. We're getting more in funnel. Show rate of that meeting, really, really important. And then qualification rate. So they showed up, they actually qualified. Because you don't want the people who are cold calling to book meetings with folks that aren't a good fit. And you need to know like what percentage of them qualified. And then from there, I look if there's multiple deal stages. So like you do multiple meetings to close a deal. I look at the drop off for each stage. So if we're, let's say 50% of our deals drop off, so I mean they're not going to buy from deal stage 1 to deal stage 2. So from the initial call to the next call, why? Is that high? Is that low? Like, we need to know why. It's never going to be too low. Maybe that needs to be 70%. And then you can start thinking, okay, just for that deal stage from meeting 1 to meeting 2, what can we do to increase? Make sure that more people are moving from deal stage 1 to deal stage 2. And then, just to kind of close the loop here at the very end of the sales process, and this doesn't matter how transactional the sale is. It could be a 1-call close, it could be a multi-call close. I'm looking at close won and close lost reason. So when we win, why do we win? When we lose, why do we lose? And that close lost reason especially can give me a really good understanding, at least at a high level, of why we're losing specific deals. And then what can we do, sometimes way early on, all the way to marketing, or within sales cycle, to help prevent that from being a close lost reason. So that's the kind of the big, the quick and dirty metrics that I'm looking at. I'm very deep in the AI world right now. So you're asking the right person. I'm like very, very deep. Over the holiday break, I learned Python just so I can like better build tools using AI. So I'm like very, and when I say learn Python tongue in cheek, obviously I'm not an expert developer, but I learned enough to be dangerous. My point here is like I'm very deep into this world. And look, there's some things that I just don't think humans need to do anymore. Like, why would I have an SDR draft a personalized cold email? There's no reason why AI can't do that for the SDR. AI doesn't have great conversations today. So that's not a good, good solution. But how can we amplify the connections? It's by better understanding the world of the person you're talking to. The better you speak their language, the better you understand their world, the better conversations we have, and the more that the person on the other side is going to feel seen and heard. All they care about, like when you just think about like when you interact with somebody who you might buy from, you really care like warmth and competency. Do they seem like good people? And are they competent? Do they know what they're talking about? AI I find very helpful for getting us to that point with reps who have to sell to different buyer personas. So to help them better understand what challenges this person might be facing, how they try to solve those challenges. The amount that I've learned just by prompting, ChatGPT or anything about certain markets is incredible. And I didn't have that when I was a rep, but if I did, I could better learn. Hey, when they said this, I didn't really understand what they were talking about. What were they talking about? And then you can learn and it accelerates that learning. So I think that's probably the best way to amplify kind of the human connection is leveraging AI to better understand the world of the buyer. Over time, I think that'll always stand, but over time, I think we're going to see parts of the job that salespeople really shouldn't be doing, mostly administrative stuff. I feel like that's all going to go away, and AI can handle all of that for us. Yeah. So that's actually was the first one I built. So over the holiday break, I built an agent with Python. Like I hard coded this, and I'm a dumb sales guy. Just to be clear for everybody, I dropped out of college to do stand up. I don't write code, but I was able to write or build a Python application using Zoom's API and OpenAI's API, which is the AI, ChatGPT stuff. And if I do a call, it will analyze the transcript. It'll identify any key moments where I said something, where I gave advice, shared any kind of wisdom, made a recommendation, whatever it is. And then it kind of clips out just those sections of Kyle talking and saying stuff cool. And then it goes through another, kind of AI agent that's designed to take those things and convert it into LinkedIn posts written in the way that I write LinkedIn posts. And it's incredible. And, you do a lot of like interesting prompting stuff to make sure it writes in a style that makes sense for you, etc. But once you have it built out, it just kind of works. So I think a lot of this stuff is going to be taken over by AI. We don't have to be spending our time doing things that don't light us up. I mean, you and I were like, this is like very obvious to us, but anybody who maybe doesn't have a real direct sales background might not know this. Salespeople generally just want to be talking to other people. We're generally like pretty extroverted, or at least we enjoy working with people and talking to people. Allowing them to just do more of that is in our best interest and their best interest. So anything we can take off their plate, we should do, and we should do it expediently because it means they can just spend more of their time talking to our potential customers. Yeah, very shitty. Yeah, 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 very, very bad. I don't want salespeople really sending emails. Likewise, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me on. Give 'em